if you strip away all of the cultural parts of China and America, really we're kind of like the same people in a lot of ways. And now I've just gotten spoiled, and I can't imagine going back to the United States because we all know that there's still some criminality in the United States. I know some of the universities are only a couple thousand RMB, like $400 tuition for the entire year. So,
really?
But yeah, for example, if I have the horrible flu or whatever, I go to the hospital. Probably my copay after everything, I pay like 5 RMB, which is like 80 cents or something.
My next guest is here. I would like to go to him. I've been eager to have this conversation. Jason Smith, how you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm great. It's a wonderful night here in Beijing. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, that's right. You're in Beijing. So you're an hour ahead of me. I'm in Indonesia as we speak. Jakarta. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought you were in New York for some reason. I don't know.
No, I was in Malaysia for the last 3 months. And then I ended up coming to Jakarta. Jakarta's like an hour behind. So yeah, you're about an hour behind me. No, you're an hour ahead of me.
8 p.m. here.
Yeah, hour ahead of me. Thank you for joining me, man. And this is Jason Smith. He's a journalist, author, radio host, podcaster, media commentator. His latest book is A World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. And I think that's why you are here. I'm super curious about this book.
最近换了新手机，看视频流畅清晰多了。大家买了新的，旧的都怎么处理？像我那台 iPhone 16 Pro Max 就找转转上门回收了6800多。他家是真方便，回收师最快1小时上门，不管是写字楼还是住宅区都能随叫随到。而且转转是专业的二手回收平台，全国400多个城市都支持上门回收，当面报价，现场打钱。我还发现转转不只收手机，像各种数码产品、家用电器、黄金，甚至是 LV 包腕表这种奢侈品，我一直想卖又懒得处理，现在有了转转，一键下单就能通通打包带走，特别省心。要我说，轻松处理闲置物品，找转转这种大平台准没错。
How long have you been in Beijing?
Well, I've been living in China for 13 years, but I spent one of those years in Wuhan. The rest has been here in Beijing.
As an American, what is your overall general impression of it, of being there for 13 years? 13 years is a while to be in a particular one location. I'm curious on your take, just in general, as an American, if like differences, similarities, give us your view of this.
Well, I think it's changed not because I've changed or America's changed. Actually, I think America's actually stayed very similar to the way it's always been since like 1995. But China's changing very quickly. We call it China speed, a lot of us foreigners who live here. And when I arrived here in 2012, it was not like it is today. There was a lot of air pollution, water pollution. There was some criminality, light criminality on the streets, But today, the Beijing that I live in is nothing like that. The skies are blue. The water is clean. I can go to the faucet and drink the water out of the faucet now, which I wouldn't have done in 2012. I think this creates a lot of misunderstandings about China too, because a lot of people, they think back to 2008, the Olympics, when a lot of foreigners were here in China, and they think that's what China's like, because the United States hasn't changed and the UK hasn't changed. Everyone assumes that China's still like that too. However, China is nothing like it was just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, especially. So, in terms of your original question, as an American, right? So people in China are actually really similar to Americans. They care about their family. They want to get ahead. They work hard, really hard. Like a lot of the world I've heard about, a lot of people are much more relaxed in a lot of countries. And Americans, we're told we work too hard. Well, I think in China, they work too hard. So I think we're actually really similar. We all really competitive. People go to school for extra classes to try to get ahead. They take on second jobs sometimes. So I think actually America and China, if you strip away all of the cultural parts of China and America, really we're kind of like the same people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, people are people everywhere you go. Yeah, they just are. Like, there may be an overlay. People are the people anywhere you go. It really is. I mean, there may be a cultural overlay, but they're the same. I'm curious on also, why did you move to China? What was the thing? Was it just journalistic interest at first, and you realized I actually like it here?
Well, actually, I got a master's degree in history, world history, but I actually hadn't been anywhere. And so I felt like dishonest. And all I knew about the world was in books. And so, I'd read a lot of books, but that's, books is not like the world. So I had to move somewhere completely different. And I mean, I couldn't think of a place more different in my head at the time than China. So I moved to China to be like, okay, let's experience the world. And since then, I've traveled around a lot in Asia, about 20 countries. Yeah. But, I did, like you said, like you mentioned, I fell in love with China, and I was just like, you know what? There are some advantages to living in China that I don't have in the United States. Like, in 2012, crime was bad, about the same as the United States. But by 2018, there practically wasn't street crime at all. And now I've just gotten spoiled, and I can't imagine going back to the United States because we all know that there's still some criminality in the United States. I don't want, my bicycle stolen or whatever, and that wouldn't happen here. People leave their keys in their motorbikes in Beijing or in most of China. Because, it's upward mobility. It's all about socioeconomic upward mobility because incomes are increasing and the cost of living is staying the same. There's almost no inflation. People are just better off generally than they were. And so I don't think there's a sociocultural feeling of needing to resort to crime. Whereas in the United States, inflation is really high. There's record homelessness and all of these other problems that are plaguing Americans. And so, people are turning to crime out of desperation. It's basically Les Miserables, right? So, but I don't experience that out here, and I don't want to. So I'm just kind of like, oh well, I'll just stay.
What's the word for it? Social. It's not social confidence. It's social trust or something like that.
High trust. I don't know.
High trust society. That's what it is. Where people don't feel the need to. It's like, okay, I can get food delivered. It can be here. Nobody's going to touch it. Or I can, as you point out, I can leave my keys here and nobody's going to touch it. Now, you're pointing out that in 2012, it wasn't that way.
It wasn't that way.
You're pointing out that there's a marked difference in the living standards for people from 2012 to 2025, just over the course of these 10, 13 years.
Oh, yeah, so much. And well, you could just look around and see it. A huge part of that is, what we Americans actually want our government to do is to take care of us, right, to some extent. And in China, that is actually the case. So we're talking about poverty alleviation. There was a campaign that ran until 2020 called the Poverty Alleviation Campaign. There's a different campaign now called Common Prosperity, which is seeking to forward those goals and make them larger. But let me give you a couple of examples. I went to a place called Pishan County, Xinjiang. It was one of the absolute poorest places in all of China. People for centuries, their families were living in horrible desert conditions, cut off from other cities and towns, traveling by camel. And then, Chinese government, local and national, came in. They built an apartment complex. They created wells, well water. They built schools. They put in greenhouses, and they gave homes. China doesn't usually just give homes away. Usually it's subsidized housing. But in this case, the government actually gave people homes because the level of impoverished living there was so extreme that, just radical change had to take place. So all of these people, we're talking about hundreds of families, all got free apartments. All their kids got enrolled in schools. Every home, which is every family, got their own greenhouse. Agronomists, who are scientist farmers, came out and taught them how to use it. They can grow for subsistence if they want, or they can grow cash crops. 5G towers were put up. And this is kind of something that happens all over China to help people out of poverty. Roads and 5G and free smartphones. Then they're taught how to use the smartphone so they can sell their product that they grow, not just locally in the local town or village, but nationally, so they can find the best prices for the goods that they're growing. Then agronomists teach them how to grow the foods, how to find the best markets, how to get that delivered, how to maximize their profits. They didn't just give them these homes. They gave them a permanent solution to creating their own wealth. There are even these centers that are set up around places like this in China, where usually it's the women, because I've been to a lot of these centers, who will go in and they will learn how to do live streaming. They will live stream, sell their products, and then there are technicians there that'll help them put their products in the right bottles and the right boxes and get it, ready for a national market and in some case international markets. And so they're not just selling in the local village or just growing food to survive, but they're actually thriving and creating opportunities for their kids. And, another thing is education is really affordable. So these kids, if they study well and, they actually do get points for both being impoverished. And a lot of the times these are, the 55 ethnic minorities. They're going to have actually more points added to their Gaokao, and then they'll be able to go to better universities. So, I mean, the government really did create the means for poor people, especially extremely poor people, to get ahead. And I think that's something we Americans should learn from. And that's actually why I study it. I don't study it just to be like, wow, China. I study it because we have these problems in America too.
Yes.
There is 0% of Chinese people now living in extreme poverty. Is there poverty? Yes, there is poverty. But the extreme poverty, this is an official IMF World Bank term, doesn't exist. Crazy, United States, 1.25% people now in extreme poverty. So what can we learn from China? And I think there's a lot.
Well, your book, just to show the audience, this may be a stupid question, but why did you write this book? What were you trying to communicate with this book? A World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. Is this specific to China, or is the thought also this is a roadmap that other countries, specifically the U.S., could also use to try to get out of poverty?
Well, the book that I'm working on right now is actually about poverty alleviation inside of China. But the book A World Beyond Poverty is actually not as much about that. It's about the Belt and Road Initiative and Chinese aid to other countries, because I wanted to highlight, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about China, and they say, oh, China is exploiting the developing world. It's not behaving like a global South country. It's using other global South countries. And I actually had been researching this sort of in my own spare time for a decade. And I just found these accusations ridiculous. There's even a professor, Deborah Brodigan at Johns Hopkins University, who has written an article in The Atlantic that's, China's debt trap myth, and it debunks that. But I wanted to go case by case and show hundreds of examples of when China went in and gave loans or built hospitals. And that's what the book is. It's a compendium. It's not an encyclopedia because I don't have all of the examples of China's engagement, but it has hundreds of examples where China built a school in Nigeria, China built a school in Nepal, China built a school in Sri Lanka, China built a bridge. In all of these cases that I'm mentioning, these are free projects. They were just like, Nepal was like, oh, we're struggling, China, would you help us? Yes, China actually built 2 or 3 different schools in Nepal for free. They invested millions of dollars. They actually did hire Chinese companies, and those Chinese companies did hire locals. And then they had tech transfers where they taught, how to operate bridges or how to operate power plants or how to operate or maintain schools and all kinds of things like that. And China has built hundreds of free schools and hospitals and bridges. They call them friendship hospitals and friendship schools. And they're all over the world, especially in the developing world. Are there loans? There are loans. And those loans are actually usually gigantic. There's enormous loans that China's giving out because China has $3.5 trillion, maybe $3.6 trillion in Forex, money that it can't use inside, dollars and rupees and all of this from trade. So what's China going to do with it? It can buy U.S. treasuries, right? But the United States has not exactly been very respectful to China. So China was looking to diversify away from treasuries. And one of the ways that China found that it could do that is by investing in developing countries and giving like 2% loans or 0% loans. Well, it doesn't make as much as a treasury. However, it's not going to support the dollar system so that the United States could use that against China and undermine China's holdings of U.S. treasuries. And it works diplomatically to help countries around the world look favorably upon China. A lot of countries actually use these loans from China to get out of debt from the IMF and World Bank, which impose, liberal policies onto those countries and force them to follow Washington, D.C.'s rules, the Washington Consensus. But China has a very strict policy of non-intervention in foreign countries. So if you want to build a power plant that costs $1 billion, China will help you build that. But China's also not going to say, but you need to liberalize your banks to get this loan. So they're going to be lower interest than IMF and World Bank loans, and then China's not going to go into your country and tell you how to manage your affairs. So Actually, that's what the book is about. The book is about the reality that China is actually helping to develop the developing world. And I also want to point out something that, China's not just being selfless. China needed a place to park its money. It's really good for diplomacy. And also China, by developing all of these developing countries, is taking power away from the Western orbit. Because for centuries, and we both know this, Europe and the United States have exploited the world. And even after political sovereignty was attained, for example, in a lot of African countries, the exploitation continued as neocolonialism through banking systems and finance and Western companies going into those countries and continuing to use them as a source of raw materials so that goods could be produced in the West and then sold back to them at inflated prices. But what China's doing by building schools and hospitals and factories and power is enabling these countries to have economic independence from the West, which actually takes power away from the West and gives it back to the developing world, creating a more multipolar sort of situation, which is in China's interest.
Yeah. I never took it as being selfless. I don't think countries are selfless. I think countries are realists. But China is different because it seems to seek win-win relationships. It's like, yeah, we're building this hospital. This is something that you obviously require. We're not asking you anything for this particular hospital. It is in your best interest and it's our best interest because we get to park money there also. Like, I get the win-win relationship that's generated in these deals in a way that the IMF, of course, tries to impose its own values on whatever country that it's dealing with. It's like, hey, we need you to sell your railroads now. We need you to sell your water system. We need you to, effectively handicap yourself going forward. I don't see Chinese relationships working out that way. At least it doesn't seem that way. What is the Gaokao? I don't know what that is.
Oh, the Gaokao is a crazy test. Okay, imagine the SATs, but when everyone in America took the SATs, it was the only deciding factor for which university you get into. So that's what basically the Gaokao is. It's a very high stress, super intensive test that stresses children out and frightens parents for their entire life until they pass. And if you don't do well, you still can go back to high school in many cases and then take it again the next year. Ethnic minorities, the 55, there's 56 ethnic groups, 55 minorities. They get higher points. People who are in impoverished conditions get higher points. And then that helps them determine which level tiers of different universities they have the ability to apply to and get into. So it's everything. It is so, and that's why kids in China study so hard. In America, a lot of kids get out of school, they go just play in the mud or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? But in China, they get out of school and then they go to a different school and then they get out of that school, they go to a different school. And then on the weekend, they got 3 or 4 schools because it is so incredibly competitive.
Wow. And that is the determination of what school they ultimately get to go to.
Yes. Not necessarily. Some of them who don't get into Tsinghua, which is like the Harvard of China, they will then apply to go to universities abroad because they did study well. They have excellent, grades and whatnot. So they'll go to Australia or England or America or Canada or increasingly not the United States because the visa situation is crazy now. And the whole Red Scare thing is frightening international students, especially Asian and Chinese students, away from the United States. But a lot of the students who don't get the ideal Gaokao score will go to international schools then, especially if they're from wealthier families, because going to an international university is much more expensive. In the United States, a university, it might be 3 to 1, the cost. In some cases, it's 6 to 1. So in some universities, in some majors or graduate schools, an international student might be paying 6 times as much money as a U.S. resident to go to the same school.
Wow, that hurts. How are the schools paid for in China? I mean, is that state paid for, or does the person have to cover the cost of schools?
People need to cover the cost. There are scholarships and grants, just like in the United States, and there are a lot of them, especially for, excellent students, especially for graduate students. However, school is just not that expensive. Some of the universities are only a couple thousand RMB, like $400 tuition for the entire year. So,
really?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go to some of the better schools, they can be 6,000 RMB for a semester, which is like $900. Like, that's elite, basically. But like, it's super affordable. There's no such thing as student debt. There's no one goes into debt. Also, Chinese are super savers. You can just look up UN statistics. Most Chinese adults save 40% of their income. So most parents, when they send their kids to school, they just pay for everything, and the kid just gets out. There's no debt at all. They don't have a $2 trillion student debt nightmare like we do.
That is, you have no idea how angering that is. And I don't mean that from the stand, because look, I remember not just school debt, medical debt too. I remember being in Egypt. I was smoking a cigarette with a guy. I was in a doctor's office, and we were smoking a cigarette, and he turns to me, and I didn't realize he was German. And he says, "How much did you pay for this medical thing?" And I told him, he says, "My government covers this." And it's like, I don't know if Americans know this, but we've been brainwashed in many respects to believe that, well, you're supposed to cover that stuff. That shouldn't be something that the government helps cover, or at the very least help manages in regards to your expenses. It's almost as if they expect you to go into debt for that stuff. I don't know. It's just amazing. Like the stuff that we accept here. It's just very strange in comparison to other countries that don't seem to have those issues, or for the most part don't have to effectively, the notion of a kid graduating with $40,000 of debt seems mind-blowing to me. But that's normal in the States. And then it's like in China, despite the fact that they have this seemingly higher level of education, especially if you're looking at the AI, comp sci, science, et cetera, you're looking at the number of students that are in these schools. It's a higher level of education, and yet they get out without any debt. That's astonishing. How about medical bills? How is medicine and those type of things practiced in China? Is there also, the reason I'm asking this, because the argument that is being made seemingly is that this is a way for debt alleviation. This is a way that policy can influence, especially your latest book, policy can influence how much money people have in their pockets, how much money they spend on the various items, how much they can save, as opposed to having, I think most Americans, I think it's like 60, 70% are $500 away from a disaster where they can't afford it. Wow, that's amazing. How did China do this? Like, how was it able to keep inflation low and keep school costs low? I would imagine medical bills low, while also dealing with the economic betterment of its population. Is it a government policy issue, or was there something else going on?
Inside of the questions that you asked are like 100 other questions. So I'm going to try to just cover the basics. Okay, so in China, the economy is a combination of, capital exists. For example, there is the Shanghai Stock Exchange. Right. But there's also what we call the commanding heights of the economy, which are the critical inputs for the way that the economy works. And those are like telecommunications, are mostly controlled by the government. They're called state-owned enterprises, or what we would call utilities, which we used to have in the United States. And so electricity controlled mostly by SOEs, state-owned enterprises. A lot of mining is covered by SOEs. Just so many different aspects. So when you're in your home, for example, I go turn on the water, it's run by the state. I turn on the electricity, it's run by the state. So those are really inexpensive. Electricity is about half the cost in the United States. Water is about a sixth the cost. Telecommunication is less than a tenth of the cost. So whatever you're paying for your phone bill, I pay considerably less. I think I pay 50 RMB, or 100 RMB, which is like $10 or something a month. So that's also a mix of factories. So, King Donald Trump or whatever, he wants to bring back factories. One of the reasons it can't work really effectively is because if you set up a factory in the United States, you have to pay for electricity. That's a private company. They're exploiting you. You're a factory. They're trying to exploit you. Your water company, private. They want to exploit you. The people who are leasing the land to you, they're private. They want to exploit you. You're buying goods from mines to process. They're private. They want to exploit you. So setting up a factory in the United States doesn't make a lot of sense because everything is so expensive. You set up a factory in China, the electricity, the water, the minerals, the telecommunications, the logistics and infrastructure, it's all owned by the state. So if you want to ship things, open a factory, use electricity and water to build things, it doesn't cost you very much. So everything is very inexpensive. So of course, products that are made in China, and I think it's like 36% of all manufacturing activity in the world is done in China. They're all much more affordable. So, that's why inflation is low, because the state manages all of the inputs for the market economy. Then there's a thriving market economy. We have KFC and McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Starbucks. And then, of course, Chinese brands that are like that. We have like 600 Hilton hotels plus Chinese hotels. And so there's market economy working too. But the market economy sits on top of the state-owned enterprises, which provide all of these affordable inputs. So, also this is another thing that's going to blow your mind. 93% of Chinese adults own their own home. So, it's like 60% or 65% in the United States.
93% own their own
and then
home.
80% of those don't have a mortgage at all. So they don't make a payment. There's no rent. There's no house payment, and there's no property taxes. So if a person has a job and owns a home, which is pretty much everybody, then all they have to do is, save their money, and the water is affordable, electricity is affordable, everything is made here, so it's affordable. Inflation is low because of the way the economy is run and the state managing certain kinds of enterprises. But you did mention something earlier about medicine. China does not, I just want to, for the record, China does not have universal health care. It has a different system. It has workers' healthcare. So 98% of people are covered, but it's through your employer and if you don't have an employer, there are other ways to get it also through the state and get it subsidized. And then there is a slight co-payment. But for example, if I have the horrible flu or whatever, I go to the hospital, probably my copay after everything, I pay like 5 RMB, which is like 80 cents or something. So there is a cost. And if you have something really rare, like some kind of cancer that no one's ever heard of, you might actually have very expensive bills. But 90%, 95% of all of the reasons you will go to the hospital cost almost nothing. My wife had pneumonia last winter. She was hospitalized in a hospital bed, living there for 2 weeks. She came out after everything. It was like $100.
Dude,
but it's not universal health care. It's just a different system.
I know, but 90-something% covered is astonishing. I mean, even some places in Europe don't have universal health care. I mean, like, I understand what you mean. It's the overwhelming majority, like upwards of over 90% are covered, and then the state comes in to deal with the other percentage.
There's also other systems where you live in that poor village that I mentioned, Pishan, for example. They have a clinic there, so that's free, and that nurses and doctors go there and get on certain days and things to give free treatments. And if they need a real hospital, they can go to the city Hotan, which is nearby, and then they can get a better treatment. So there are doctors providing for those other 2 or 3% that are missed by the national health care scheme, but a lot of that is just like local nurses and clinics and stuff to make up for the coverage.
That is amazing. That is amazing. That's mind blowing. Those are not things that Americans know. It's just not. I mean, wow. By the way, are doctors state or are they private, or they have a combination of both?
Combination of both. There is a private healthcare scheme here to allow private hospitals to open up to be in addition to the state provided hospitals. I have both because I'm a foreigner hired by a Chinese company. They gave me, I'm automatically included in the Chinese coverage, and then they give me a private company also. I actually know the lady who owns most of the hospitals in China. She's the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce, and I interviewed her before. She's a very nice lady, but I don't go to her hospitals, no offense. The Chinese state hospitals are actually just much faster and more efficient. They see a lot of people, and it feels like less personal. And sometimes people walk into the room with you in the when you're seeing the doctor at the same time that you're like seeing the doctor. But you're in and out really fast, and I guarantee you that doctor has seen 1,000 times more cases than a private doctor because they're just so busy. I bet that their diagnoses are just more accurate. It's just my own feeling.
Jason, thank you for this. Yeah, this has been a great breakdown, and
thank you so much for having me.
So much from this. And that is the highest honor I can tell my guests when I've learned something in this, and I've learned so much from this. Thank you for this. I hope you'll come back. By the way, this has been fantastic. I'd be delighted. Jason Smith, he's a journalist, author, radio host, podcaster, media commentator. His latest book is entitled A World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. You have a good one, man. Be safe, okay?
Thank you.